could see an idea? What if you could hold an idea in your hand and shape it until it became clear and defined? In fact, it became so clear that others would understand what you had to say without even saying it, just by seeing the idea. If you've ever had the feeling that you knew something but just couldn't find the words to describe it, you can imagine how powerful seeing an idea would be. Now, what if I told you that everyone is born with the ability to see ideas, that you have it, and yet for some reason, your teachers, your bosses, and maybe even your parents have told you to knock it off? Until now, you've seen me taking visual notes of the amazing talks that we've heard so far. You've probably had a couple of reactions to it. What the heck is that guy doing? Oh, I get it. That's kind of cool. And hey, I think I could do that. Well, good news. I would like to invite you to engage with the rest of this talk in a way that might be new for you. In your bags, you've all been given little green notebooks and pens. Please go ahead and take those out now. And what I would ask you to do with those notebooks and pens is to take visual notes. Don't worry about capturing everything that I have to say. Just do short phrases of the things that are important to you, and then draw a simple icon that represents that idea. You also have a quick startup sheet by my friend and colleague Mike Rohde on the technique of sketchnoting to help get you started. If you really, really don't want to take visual notes, then I would ask you to simply doodle. It's okay. You're not going to have to show this to anyone, and I promise that I won't get offended if you're not staring at me. While you're getting your pen and paper ready, I'd like to ask a question. What's wrong with this picture? What's wrong with doodles? Why is it that we tell kids in school not to doodle? It comes naturally to them, it requires no instruction, and yet we tell them not to. I was the kid who in school always had two pieces of paper on his desk, one for my notes, one for my doodles. I got into trouble a lot, especially in algebra class. And today I doodle professionally, and more than that, I give clients, people, tools to help them see ideas, tools based on doodles, to help them solve problems that would be impossible to solve any other way. So why is it that we tell kids they can't doodle in school? My colleagues Sunny Brown and Rachel Smith, write this down, Sunny Brown, Rachel Smith, have spoken at TED conferences before about the power of drawing ideas. I'd like to build on their ideas along with those of other visual practitioners like Diane Durand and Dean Myers, who have spoken about evolving the conversation around drawing in the classroom and in business. I'd like to talk about why I believe doodles can help engage students in learning, prepare them for a complex world, and can actually make learning fun again. And I'd like to do that by turning the three biggest misconceptions about doodles on their heads. That they're distracting, that there's no place for them in the real world, and that there are only places in art class. Okay, first misconception. Doodles are distracting. But before I talk about that, I want to tell you what I think about doodles today and where they are. Not so long ago, left-handedness was a bad thing. My grandfather was left-handed. His teachers would beat his knuckles with rulers if he wrote with his left hand. He figured out how to write with his right hand, but as a result, he developed a stutter. He got out of school, started writing with his left hand again, and lost his stutter. But I can't help but wonder what school would have been like for him if he'd simply been allowed to do what came naturally. As a father of 4 kids who are about to start their education, my biggest fear is that schools will continue to ignore the fact that different kids learn in different ways. And I believe that many kids learn with doodles. So let's talk about those misconceptions. First misconception, doodles are distracting. Doodles are inescapable evidence of a wandering mind. They are black and white proof that you weren't listening, and if you weren't listening, well, how could you be learning? So here's what we know. We learn by seeing, hearing, and doing. You've heard of the visual learner, the auditory learner, and maybe the kinesthetic or the motion active learner. Recent studies have actually shown that no one is purely one style of learner. We, all of us, have a part of each one of these. And the more you engage all of those styles, the greater your understanding of the content that you're receiving, and the greater your retention. Doodling engages all three styles. Doodles don't even have to be related to the subject matter. I love this quote by my colleague Sunny Brown. She says, "There is no such thing as a mindless doodle." In a study that looked at people listening to complicated phone messages, it was found that those who were listening and doodling at the same time actually retained 29% more content than those that were not doodling. Did you get that? Doodling keeps you engaged when the content is boring, which is why I asked you to doodle while I was talking. But when doodles are related to the subject matter, here's what happens. You make a personal connection with whatever it is you're hearing. As you're taking notes right now, you're thinking, what does this remind me of? What does it look like? What's a metaphor that could represent it? You create an experiential memory that makes that learning yours. And it allows you to see patterns and make connections that would be totally invisible to the passive learner. Second misconception. There is no place for doodles in the real world. Doodles are useless. Your boss isn't going to pay you to doodle. Okay, for right now, we're going to ignore the following professions. Visual practitioners like me, artists, illustrators, architects, engineers, creatives, designers of all kind, and anybody that actually has to draw as part of their job. Ignore those people. Instead, we're going to focus on what my algebra teacher called real jobs. Has anyone seen this before? It's been called the most famous napkin in Texas. It's Herb Kelleher's original business model for Southwest Airlines. Dallas, San Antonio, and Houston. And it was drawn literally on the back of a napkin. There's a book about that, by the way. It's called Back of the Napkin. I highly recommend it. The point is that regardless of what your job is, chances are you have to solve hard problems or communicate complex ideas. The more complex the idea, words lose their effectiveness, and visuals actually gain their effectiveness. Think about this. When was the last time that you had to sit in front of an 80-slide PowerPoint deck or read a 100-page strategic plan? How much of it did you really retain? One of the pioneers of the field of visualization, David Sibbett, has a saying. He likes to say, you don't build a house from a set of instructions. You use a blueprint. The University of Stanford took a look at group visuals and found that they actually increase retention by 17%, improve consensus in a group by 19%, and shorten the time that it takes to solve hard problems by 24%. Tell me if that's not real-world application. I want to take a quick minute and give you a list of visual tools, if you're interested in this, that you can go back and look up at a later time. I won't define them. I just want to give you the list. Visual tools. You have your brainstorming tools, like your mind maps, your word clouds, and your concept maps. You have your decision-making tools, like force field diagrams, decision trees, fishbones, and quad charts. You have your planning tools, like your Gantt charts, your swim lanes, your process maps. You have your whole systems tools, like your context maps, vision maps, and learning maps. And finally, you have all of the really cool stuff that you get to play with. You've got groupware, whiteboards, graphic templates like the business model canvas or the graphic game plan, and my own personal favorite, paper markers. Okay, what I just demonstrated for you is a visual tool called a mind map. Raise your hand if you've seen it before. Okay. I honestly believe that this is the best way to brainstorm, period. This is something that we should be teaching our kids. You start with a central idea and then branch outward as other ideas occur to you. You draw connections as it makes sense. You can imagine how powerful tools like this are in brainstorming, generating ideas, solving problems, and planning the way ahead. This is real-world application. Third misconception. It's only places in art class. We're not teaching kids how to draw in this class, right? Let me ask a question. What's the point? Do you want kids to have nice, neat, clean, sterile notes that repeat verbatim what the teacher says? Or do you want to tap into those folks, to those students, whose natural learning style it is to doodle? It's their notes. Let them learn in the way that makes sense for them. Believe it or not, kids get into trouble for this if they're taking notes in a way that's a little bit outside. So do grown-ups for that matter. I want to share with you two studies. One is by Tony Buzan, who's one of the world's authorities on learning techniques. He asks students what words they most often associated with note-taking, and here's what they said. They said that note-taking was boring, a punishment, depression, fear, wasted time, rigidity, and failure. This is how kids feel about the way that they spend most of their time in school, and it doesn't have to be that way. By the way, Tony Buzan went on to create a new style of taking notes that he called mind mapping. Another study that I want to share with you. This one was by Dr. F. Robert Sable from Purdue University. And he looked at some of the effects of No Child Left Behind. You can imagine some of the things that he found. Depression, anxiety, added behavior and discipline problems, lack of work ethic, resentment. But here's what he found that was very, very interesting. When it came to visuals or drawing of any kind, students reported that they did it because it was fun. How about that? They said they enjoyed it. It relaxed them. It allowed them to express themselves, to deal with uncertainty and complexity. It helped them to learn, and it helped them to solve problems. No kidding. So I want to give you my favorite question. What if? What if we allowed students to take visual notes or to doodle in class? I'm not suggesting that everything that they turn in, homework, tests, that it have drawings all over it. On the other hand, how cool would it be if students turned in a mind map along with an essay that they did so that teachers could actually see what the thought process was? Isn't that the point of school in the first place? To teach kids how to think? So here's the message that I want to leave with you. Excuse me. Here's the real tragedy when we don't teach kids how to draw. They grow up to be adults that say, I can't draw, and I'm not a visual person. So here's what I'd like you to do. Go with me on this. Get real comfy in your seats. Take a deep breath. Release. Again. Now close your eyes. I can see all of you. I know who's cheating. In your mind, go back to when you were a student. You're sitting at your desk. In front of you is an open notebook. And on that notebook is a doodle. There was always one drawing, one picture, one doodle that you drew again and again and again. Open your eyes, find a blank page in your notebook, and draw that doodle. This is called guided imagery, by the way. I learned this from my friends at TEDxLizardCreek. It's a German visualization firm. Germans have the coolest stuff. These markers are German. Okay. Here's what most people draw. See if it clicks with what you drew. An object Most of the time it's a house for some reason. An object, something from nature, a person or a face, something abstract, or a word. Yeah? What do these things have in common? They're not what you would call fine art, but that's not the point. They use simple shapes, simple lines. They are symbols for the idea. They are iconic. What matters here is the idea. This is not what a house looks like, and yet somehow people know that this is a house. When you use simple shapes and symbols, you have everything that you need in order to take visual notes. So here's what I would ask you. If you are a teacher, well, let me do one more what if first. So what if you are a teacher and you catch a student doodling in class? Or what if you're a boss and you catch an employee doodling in a meeting? Your first reaction is going to be, that guy wasn't paying attention. Despite everything that you've just heard, you spent your whole life being trained that doodling is wrong. Then ask yourself, what's the point? Do you want people to sit in front of you, still as statues, eyes locked, maybe a little drool going on? Or do you want them to maybe learn something? 51% of us are introverts. 29% of us are predominantly visual thinkers. 37% of us are predominantly kinesthetic learners. Chances are, with those kinds of numbers, someone in front of you would learn better if they were doodling. So here's what I would ask of you. Think with ink. If you have a pen in your hand, draw. Think, what's right with this picture? What's right with this doodle? If you are a parent, a teacher, a caregiver, a manager, or a leader, create a space where doodling is okay. I honestly believe that I have the best job in the world. I help people to see ideas. When you create a space where doodling is okay, you help others to see ideas too. Thank you.
Well, I'm trained to die one day at a time, like a lifeless sail, waiting on the wind's exhale to another day.